You're listening to The Dating Den with dating and relationship badass and best-selling author Marni Batista. Every week, you'll get the raw truth from top experts and real people on the important dating, sex, and relationship issues you want to know about. So if you're ready for true talk that's authentic and unfiltered, and you're not afraid to be called out on your stuff, then you're ready for what's next.
The Dating Den, episode 71 with Andy Horning. Marni's couples coach shares strategies on how to choose a partner and navigate those common relationship pitfalls. Ladies, welcome to my dating den. Today, my dating den has a remote location, actually. I am in a den in Arizona in the heat. So I thought I would bring in the man who has given me the heat in my marriage. Not my husband, no, the man that Jeremy and I have been working with the last year to help us have an epic relationship. And we worked with Andy Horning since last October, and I was just blown away with who he is and what he does with couples. And I thought, of course, I have to invite him into the den. So welcome, Mr. Andy Horning.
Woo! Happy to be in the den.
Super excited to be in the den. So let me tell you all a little bit about him. He is a graduate in the University of Michigan, which at the time of this recording is a really big deal because they're going to the Final Four, right?
Woo!
Yeah,
yes,
that's true.
Go blue.
Because I do watch 30 seconds of news. He is a couples therapist. He's been doing it for 20 years. He is a host of an amazing podcast on courageous conversations in relationships. And he's a teacher at the Hoffman Institute, which is a personal growth week-long intensive learning retreat in California, which I did in December 2006, which was the kick in the booty that really started me on the path of not only falling in love with myself and finding the man that I love, but also being able to really help other women. And so the Hoffman Institute has always been a turning point in my life. In fact, my husband proposed to me after we did some work up at the Hoffman Institute. And so when we decided we wanted to have a year of intention in our relationship, we decided to go back home to the old institute up there in White Sulphur Springs. We did this amazing couples retreat, and we ended up having Mr. Andy Horning as our teacher, and he kind of blew my mind. So we said, let's do this together with Andy for a year, and the results have been amazing, and I wanted to share them with you. So you've been doing this a long time. I mean, you just must hear everything. But if you were to really look at the biggest challenges that couples have, at the deeper cut, besides money, parenting, I mean, maybe those are it. But I just felt like when we worked together, you really showed us that there was so much deep questions and issues that sort of were bubbling to the forefront of a relationship in the disguise of those things. So in your experience, what are people up against today?
Ooh, what a great question to start with. But I'll tell you, after doing this for years, here's what here's what I get, Marni, is that this kind of issue and what I'm experiencing in the relationship doesn't come up with other people. And people say that to me and to their partner, what's happening with you doesn't happen in my other relationships. And they say that with some surprise. And of course, I'm not surprised because the challenges that intimate partnership present are bigger, deeper, harder to crack than any other partnership or friendship or work relationship that we have. So it's very normal that being in an intimate partnership will bring up big questions, vulnerability, challenges that other relationships don't even begin to scratch the surface of.
So that's really interesting. I was just thinking here, because I literally am the most calm, chill person. But when I get into it with my husband, I told him, I'm I never have it. Yeah, I never have a desire to smack anybody. You know what I mean? Just where I'm hey, And it's interesting. And one of the things that, you've really helped us look at is what's going on around that. So, but here's what's interesting, because I talk to people that are dating, right? They're in the pursuit of love. And they're looking for like freaking butterflies and ponies and rainbows, which is great. And people have butterflies and rainbows and ponies. And then after a certain amount of time, like the real stuff starts coming up, that healing work that the person is in your life to do. So is there like a time frame? Like, what do you think about, like, you know, in the dating process, how can you avoid this? Or is it possible? And then when does this stuff start to show up in relationships? And do you, and I'm stacking the questions, so sorry. But then, like, how do you know that's when you're supposed to lean in or bail?
Right. I mean, well, whenever I come up against a challenging situation in my life, one of the things I do is hold the question. So you might hold the question like, is this challenge mean that our relationship should not exist? Or is it a normal struggle associated with blending of two lives together? A normal struggle associated with the challenge of being vulnerable with someone. You know, the interesting thing is that oftentimes we make the other person wrong. And I always say to people, you know, he doesn't have to be wrong for you to be right, or she doesn't have to be wrong for you to be right. And the fact that people can be right without making the other person wrong is a simple concept, but oftentimes it's like we don't know who we are unless we find something wrong in someone else. And so what I encourage people to do is, like, stake a claim on what you believe, what you feel, what you know to be true in your own life, separate from the guy you're dating or the guy you're in partnership with. And that requires a little bit of work, but the rewards are worth it.
Yeah, like when you just said, like, you don't have to be making someone wrong to be right. That like kind of broke my brain a little bit. So like what does that look like in real life?
Well, like we could take something specific like what food people like or habits they have, you know, something more superficial, and it bugs you about them. Well, like, what does that mean for you? Oh, you value being on time. You value cleanliness. You value good manners. You value all kinds of things. But it's often not until we notice or are irritated by the lack of it that we realize how important it is to us. But the important thing is to notice the lack of it and then bring it back to us and what we want, we value, we believe, what we stand for as a person.
I love that. Does that make sense? Yeah, it totally does. And one of my mentors always said, like, if you approach it as with the energy of everyone is always doing the best they can, right?
Yeah.
Like, then that means even if the best is different than your values, it doesn't necessarily have to make them wrong. They just have a different value, or they just don't have a skill, or or whatever it is, right?
Right. And that would have to be the thing that I notice exists in dating, but also once people are together, is that people have a hard time asking for what they want. You know, it's this idea that we're somehow selfish or needy. I mean, one of the things I noticed in the dating world out there is like, needy is a 4-letter word. Be anything, but don't be needy. And that often rubs up against very normal needs that we might have. So I get the challenge of being a dating person, not wanting to be needy and yet wanting to, you know, be human, and we all have needs. Navigating that isn't easy.
Yeah, totally. I had a person that I was just talking to, and she said, this is right up your alley with the Hoffman Institute work. She said, you know, I'm sure all your clients say this. Like, I mean, I don't need a man. I mean, like, you know, I take care of my kids, and I'm single, you know, and I make money, and, you know, all of that. I don't need a man. And what we got to was like, she was raised by her father, who basically said, you know, you need to be self-sufficient. You know, like you don't get to have any, right? And how that like impacts all of the relationships that we have. So then let's just go back to the last part of my original question, which is, so if you notice that there's differences, do you have any sort of like basic question or litmus test some of our listeners can use to really get real about, is this something I need to lean into? Or is this a reason that I need to consider that this isn't my person, given that struggle is normal and healthy?
Yeah, that is such a great question. And again, just holding that question. But where I always encourage people to go is to notice and engage around differences, right? Rather than, you don't want to do the extremes of avoiding them. Be like, I don't see it. Don't look behind the curtain. Don't look there. I don't see it. We agree on everything. You don't want to be avoidant like that. You also don't want to do the opposite, where you're nitpicking, noticing, micromanaging, hypervigilant about differences. But the key piece is that when differences do come up, like play with them, talk about them, notice them. Try not to bring judgment or a sense of attachment or story making about what those differences mean. And then from that place, Marni, to see how couples act, how people act when there's differences. And that's the data you want to look at. That's the data you want to see. Oh my God, this guy really was open and curious when we had differences, or it went really south when we had those differences.
That's such an important thing. I always talk about non-negotiables, that there are these certain deal breakers, and that at least one of them should be a solid foundation that helps you sort of get back to compatibility, that helps you be able to have a conversation about differences, because once butterflies and rainbows go away, they're there, but like you also have to be with someone who has, like you said, that ability to be curious. So I'm going to talk about what that looks like in a minute, but I want to ask one last question before we move on. And that is, so why do you think people are hypervigilant? Because a lot of my clients that are listening are like, there's, he does this and he doesn't have that and he does this. And, there's a lot of ruling out instead of ruling in. So why do people tend to get hypervigilant when they're dating and even when they're in a relationship and making people wrong?
Well, I'll tell you what, Brene Brown says it best, that when it comes to meeting people and showing up in the world, vulnerability is the first thing we look for in a person and in a room, and the last thing we're willing to share and that we're willing to be. And vulnerability is so critical, but it's not easy. And part of the reason we get hypervigilant and look to opt out rather than opt in is that it's scary. Vulnerability is hard. We're talking about putting ourselves on the line and then waiting to see if our partner will respond, or if this guy that we're dating will respond. That's a very tender, vulnerable, scary place to be, and requires lots of courage to be in that place. And so we can make up lots of stories to protect ourselves against that vulnerability. So ironically, some of the people who are the best at dating are the most courageous in their dating relationships, because they face the fear and bring it along with them rather than run from the fear, which has them show up in all kinds of ways in the dating timeline that may or may not be authentic.
And if someone has a pattern and they start to look back at their dating history, their relationship history, and they're he wasn't right for this reason, and he didn't do this, and he didn't show up that way. Or even if they're not even making it to dates because they're looking at the way that they communicated in a text message, or the energy, the story they made up, and in how they interpreted it in email. So, like, if you have a pattern of that, that hypervigilance and ruling people out, what's one practical step that somebody could take to begin to start to be aware of that, or shift it, or change it?
Yeah. So, I heard Marianne Williamson once talk about relationships, and she said, being in a partnership is like playing tennis. Our job is really to stay on our side of the net, to not run around and try and hit the ball for our partner and then run back around and try and hit the ball for us, or to put the racket down and stop playing. And so the challenge there is to stay in your lane, stay on your side of the net, and show up 100% of your 50%, and then let the chips fall where they may. So to own what you're feeling, to own the impact, and own your space, and then let go in a way, which is kind of a general thing, but it starts with owning what we're feeling, owning our intent, naming it, and allowing that to be true, and then letting go of everything else.
This is so brilliant. I have written this down from when we had one of our intensives together, was that my tendency is like, I want to hit the ball, then I'm going to go back and I make sure that you can hit it. And then sometimes though, I'm just like, I'm not playing anymore. I drop the racket and, with a slam, John McEnroe style. But this is really interesting because what you really taught us and what you just were talking about is that hitting the ball and just being in the energy or the space of that collaboration when there's a difference. Like, what do you think? Instead of the I'm right, you're wrong, or I have to protect myself, is that hitting it back and forth. And one of the things that you taught us, which I think was brilliant, was this whole idea of differences of position versus different desires as really like a problem solving skill. So can you explain what that is? Because Jeremy and I went into this thing like we have totally different positions. And then we realized like we actually had the exact same desires. Yeah.
So it came out of my work as a mediator with couples who were divorcing, and being trained and years of being a mediator where these divorcing couples would naturally come in with lots of hurt, lots of anger, and lots of different positions about what they wanted. So one person wants the house, the other person wants the house, and the other person is fighting over how much money they get, and there's lots of acrimony. And what I did with them is bring them, it's called interest-based negotiation. It's in the corporate world, it's in divorcing couples, but it really has value. I've used it in my own marriage when my wife and I are in a disagreement. We try and go underneath the disagreement to the deeper feelings, the deeper needs, the deeper interests. So needs and interests. And so, for example, it might, the other day we were having a disagreement about our kids and how to parent our kids. And we both, whether it was something around the school they go to and homework. And when we started talking about what was underneath that, then we got, we want them to be successful and to be well prepared and to be safe and to be confident. And we both could agree on some of those. Then it was a question of, okay, well, what are the strategies to meet those interests? And from that place, we stood, I know this is another thing that you like, the metaphor of standing shoulder to shoulder on a problem.
Yeah, let's do
with
it.
the problem out in front of us, rather than what so often happens with couples is that there's a problem and people put it right between them. You're on the other side, the problem's between us, go. And from that place, it's a tough road ahead. Better to say, come on over here, let's stand shoulder to shoulder with this, and let's put the problem out in front of us. And from that place, see how we can navigate it and collaborate together to solve it. Doesn't mean we're going to agree. You know, John Gottman says that 69% of the issues that couples face they disagree about and they'll never resolve. So what's different then? It's how you talk about it, how you deal and navigate with this issue that you disagree around. Pretty shocking statistics.
I love that. When I learned that last October, I was like telling my clients that, and literally like, they were like, oh shit. You know, that means, and here's what's interesting is it's almost like we go back to that hypervigilance or ruling out. It's almost like there's myth of like, well, if I found the perfect person, right, then 69% will be in, you know, agreement, and the other 30 whatever percent, he'll just agree with me. He'll agree with me. So then I'll always get my way all the time. And that's just not real. That's just not real life. So when you throw out that, you know, you do those couples retreats, right, with like 20 couples, you know, like when you throw that out and people hear like, crap, 69% are unresolvable. What happened? Like what freedom does that give us as a partner?
Well, first there's the disbelief. Like, are you serious? And there's looks of shock on people's faces. Like, you know, the mythology around love and romance is so powerful and harmful at the same time, because there is so much myth of romantic love that is so damaging. It doesn't mean you can't fall in love and have beautiful, wonderful romance. It just means that we've got to take it and deconstruct it a little bit to say that it comes with disagreement. It comes with discomfort. It comes with feeling unsure and confusion. It comes with lots of personal growth, but it doesn't come with a sort of antiseptic, unbridled joy that is never ending. It's amazing to me the number of intelligent, thoughtful, well-read people who get what intimate partnership means. They get it wrong because they're caught up in the mythology of romance.
Totally. And that then you set yourself up to be looking for the bailout, which is another Andy Horning term, right? Of like, I'm out, pull the cord. So when you, and what I also love is, for those of you that are in relationship, a really cool thing that you had Jeremy and I do is when we were talking about the shoulder to shoulder, you actually had to stand shoulder to shoulder. And like the energy of the somatics of it really was powerful. And so what does that change when couples say, all right, like if I have a common desire and I'm going to stand shoulder to shoulder, then how do you go through the process then of coming to an agreement about, you know, homework or about school or about whatever it is?
Yeah, well, you see, it starts with seeing your partner as an ally and not as the enemy, and seeing disagreement as normal rather than it must be a sign that either you're screwed up or I'm screwed up, or that means this relationship is screwed up, and just pushing forward one step at a time and asking for what you want, acknowledging what your partner wants. And from that place, there's a level of trust building that is incredibly important. You know, Sue Johnson researches it as well. We've kind of hit the big ones. John Gottman and Sue Johnson. Sue wrote Hold Me Tight. And she talks about really intimate partnership is all about trust and attachment, creating secure attachments. And that requires some building. You know, you're building this thing that has trust at its core, and it doesn't happen overnight, and it's not always easy, but the effort is worth it. You know, sometimes the bailout thing is when it gets hard or when people get stuck, they tend to bail, or they go talk to their buddy or talk to their girlfriend and be like, whew, rather than turning towards their partner and dealing with what's happening there in those courageous conversations. It's all good stuff. It's the adventure of life. And oftentimes, you know, the tragic thing and the beautiful thing is this. I have seen couples use intimate partnership to both create damage and pain and angst in their lives. And I've seen couples use intimate partnership to get everything they want in their lives and to create this beautiful, secure attachment based in trust. But you can use it for both. It has so much power for good or for evil. So you're doing good work, Marni, helping people.
Well, you know,
you also have to see it get help sooner rather than later, and holding on to a struggle and ignoring it rather than getting some help is always helpful.
Well, yeah. And what's cool is, you know, like Jeremy and I, when we came in to do this work, even last October, there wasn't like an immediate crisis, right? But we were like, you know, what we really want is epic intimacy. You know, we want to like, not just, you know, have those moments where we get along and the moments where we're not getting along. We really wanted to say, how can we grow and learn from this and be the best version of ourselves? And the relationship is like the best, like mirror, to see really what your edges are. So,
yes.
So the last question, because I literally could talk to you for days about this, but the last thing I want to ask you is, when you look at, you know, couples and working with couples going through the divorce process and working with couples working on their relationship, when you consider what a woman should really consider around choosing a partner and having an appropriate expectation around wanting to work on a relationship, like communication, you know, like what is an appropriate and reasonable expectation that you think is something really important someone should look for in a partner?
Yeah, I think at some point, you don't want to go on a first date and then say, okay, let's talk about us.
Right. Definitely don't do that.
Yeah, right. That might be a little too soon. But at some point, talking about the relationship, like, what are we? What do you feel about us? What do you want in a partnership? What do you not want in a partnership? You know, sometimes when I was dating, I would always ask people about their previous relationships because I was just kind of curious what worked, what didn't work. If somebody's ripping their ex to you, that's always a sign that, yeah, maybe there's some unresolved stuff there. That's some anger that's not resolved. But it's always good to just reflect on partnership together and what it means as a way of understanding if this is a good fit or not.
I think that's really huge, because one of the things that was always a hurdle for me and for Jeremy, even when we were dating, was that, you know, having that really big empowering moment together where we were like, wait, we're not creating like our parents' marriage or, you know, Mr. and Mrs. Smith's marriage or, you know, I don't know, freaking celebrity marriage, right? Like, we're like, we get to create what partnership looks like for us, and having those conversations and looking at what it is that you want to create is hugely valuable. Okay, last thing, you have like this is an Andy Horning phrase that pays. It's my favorite one, so I just want you to talk about it. And that is when you're in misalignment with your partner, instead of saying we need to talk or like, what's wrong with you? You're doing this or you're doing that. You taught us this amazing phrase, and it goes something like, I'm feeling disconnected. Why is that amazing? Why does that work? And when should you use it?
Has that worked for you and Jeremy?
Oh my God, it's amazing. I'm like, so I'm feeling disconnected. It's so good. It's literally the phrase that pays. I mean, I highly recommend it. But why does it work? Why is it so good?
Yeah, because it's so honest. I often look at the word integrity, important in relationship, and authenticity gets a little confused. It's like, what the hell does that mean? But if I can have my the words that are externally coming out of my mouth reflect as closely as possible to my internal experience, the external matching the internal, then I know whatever happens, I'm in good shape. And so part of the I'm feeling disconnected, I love that. Even your voice changed when you shared that, Marni.
Yeah.
Is I can easily say, like, you're ignoring me or you're on your phone too much, or there's lots of data to support any critique we have of our partner. But do we have the courage to share what's happening for us internally around needs, wants, vulnerability, and often acknowledging the disconnect is just a beautiful first step. And then the other partner can go, when it's not made about us, it's so wonderful how we can be open to someone else's experience rather than, hey, Jeremy, you're really blah, blah, blah.
Get
Jeremy
off your
might be like,
phone,
well,
yeah. I'm just looking at this thing on Instagram. Like, yeah, exactly.
Then you're often running down a conversation that may or may not really reflect what you need.
Right, which is about connection. I love it.
Let me ask you a question. So when you say, I'm interviewing the interviewer, but when you say I'm feeling disconnected, has that created a welcoming response in Jeremy? Has that been a success in terms of getting and eliciting something different?
Totally. And same for me, right? He'll say it to me when I'm like really focused or I'm on work or whatever. Saying like, I'm feeling really disconnected. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, it's like literally because I love him and he loves me. Right. And so that feeling for connection is something we really, really honor in each other. And that's what we both want. So it's really like a phrase that takes out the white noise. Right.
Yeah. That's so good. You might even, I'm imagining that, well, honey, like I need 10 more minutes and then I can give you the attention that I want and you want, but I just need 10 minutes. So I'm imagining it's not always like in that moment that everything has to drop to meet someone's need of disconnection, but at the very least it's on the table.
Totally. And sometimes that has been, but what's interesting in our experience so far is even if we're both doing stuff, when we say that, because our relationship is really important, it seems like 97% of the time, whatever we're doing, it could be stopped just to have a hug or look at each other in the eye or be like, okay, well, like, let's totally spend tonight like phone free and do blah, 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 blah. Right. To just make that plan. So it's a winner chicken dinner. Yeah, totally. Well, I'm super excited. I mean, just this whole concept of like being in relationship is an adventure and taking away the mythology around it. And it really is what inspired Jeremy and I to be like, you know what, let's have a relationship adventure year and really dive in and grow. And so we have just freaking love working with you. We're super excited to come back soon and do some more. And if y'all want to get in touch with Andy Horning, he's a genius. You can go in the show notes. You can enroll in his email newsletter and find out more. And of course, So honored for you to spend your precious time with us. And
Marni, you're the best. I love chatting about relationship. It's so fun talking about it, isn't it?
It really is, especially when, I always say, like, my life is the laboratory, right? And I mix it all up and I pour it in, and this tea, sometimes it blows up and sometimes it's, like the best cake ever. And then I get to learn that stuff and then share it with other people. So I always am so grateful for all of the challenges that I go through in all the parts of my life so that I can learn about it and then share it and introduce people in the world to the likes of you, mister.
Well, we're all students on this thing called Earth School. So
exactly.
Here's to more learning.
Exactly. Ladies, thank you for coming into the den. And do not forget, date with dignity. I love you a lot. We'll see you on the next show. Bye-bye.